The council chamber was suffused with a heavy, oppressive air, thick with the murmur of voices and the rustle of robes. Flickering oil lamps cast elongated shadows across the stone walls, illuminating the faces of men whose eyes burned with agendas as conflicting as the city's fate itself. I stood at the edge of the assembly, a quiet witness to the tempest of words that would decide the destiny of the knowledge I had sworn to protect. Dionysius, seated at the head of the marble table, radiated authority. His robes, embroidered with intricate patterns of gold thread, caught the lamplight with each sharp gesture he made. "We cannot cling to relics while the city crumbles," he declared, his voice a low rumble but laced with unmistakable fervor. "The library, for all its grandeur, has become a liability. Resources must be diverted to the city's defense and governance, not to preserving fragile scrolls that serve only the elite." A murmur of assent rippled through some of the gathered men. Others shifted uneasily, the weight of his words settling like dust over the chamber. It was not the first time such a sentiment had been voiced, but hearing it spoken aloud with such conviction struck a harsh chord within me. From where I stood, I could see the younger councilman, a man whose eyes gleamed with a hunger for both knowledge and power, rise to challenge Dionysius. "To abandon the library is to abandon the soul of Alexandria," he retorted, his voice ringing clear and sharp. "Our heritage, our wisdom, it is the foundation upon which this city stands. To let it perish is to doom us all to ignorance and ruin." The clash of ideals grew heated, voices rising and falling like waves breaking against the city's ancient walls. The council chamber became a battlefield of rhetoric, where preservation and pragmatism warred beneath flickering lamplight. As the debate unfolded, I found myself retreating into the shadows, my heart heavy with the knowledge that the future hung precariously in the balance. The faces of scholars and scribes I had met in the library floated before my eyes, their quiet hopes and whispered fears now magnified in this chamber of discord. The scent of incense mingled with the faint aroma of aged parchment and dust, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. I could almost hear the rustle of fluttering scrolls, the soft murmur of voices long silenced by time, urging me to bear witness and to act. Despite the passion on both sides, the council adjourned without resolution. The library's fate remained uncertain, suspended between neglect and the flames that threatened to consume it. Stepping out into the cool night, the city stretched before me, its streets dimly lit and shadows deepening with each passing moment. The flickering lights seemed fragile, like the last embers of a dying fire. Yet within me stirred a fierce determination. Words, I told myself, must become the fortress that withstands the blaze, the torch that carries knowledge beyond extinction. The city was divided, its leaders at odds, but the fire of resolve within me burned brighter than ever. I would write. I would preserve. Even as the world around me teetered on the edge of oblivion, the verses I crafted would be a testament to the enduring power of thought and memory. Tonight Alexandria's soul was fractured, but tomorrow through the fragile, immortal power of words it might yet endure. And so the battle for our legacy continued, not with swords or shields, but with ink and parchment, in the quiet defiance of a poet who refused to let the light of knowledge be extinguished. The council chamber's echoes faded behind me, but the urgency only grew. The city's fate was entwined with the fragile scrolls I guarded, and time was slipping away like sand through open fingers. I tightened my grip on the small bundle of parchment hidden beneath my cloak, steeling myself for the trials yet to come. For in a city divided, the poet's voice must become a beacon steady, unwavering, and eternal. The morning light filtered through the narrow lattice windows of the scriptorium, casting long, slender shadows across the stone floor worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, ink, and the faint musk of beeswax from the sealed scrolls that lined every shelf. It was here, in this quiet sanctuary of thought and words, that I first saw Nerissa, the young apprentice who would soon become the fragile vessel of our fading legacy. She stood uncertainly near the heavy oaken table, her youthful face flushed with a mixture of eagerness and trepidation. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she clutched a fresh sheet of parchment, her dark eyes wide and shining with a mixture of innocence and burgeoning responsibility. I could see in her the reflection of myself many years ago, unsure, yet drawn irresistibly to the call of words. "Come," I said softly, motioning her closer. "Here is the verse I wrote last night. It is meant to carry the memory of this place beyond the reach of flame." Nerissa stepped forward, her breath catching as she lowered herself onto the wooden bench. I placed the delicate scroll before her, its edges curling gently from the weight of countless hands. The ink still glistened faintly, the letters flowing like a river of thought across the surface. "You must copy it exactly," I instructed. "Each word, each stroke, must be preserved as if it were a living thing." Her fingers reached for the reed pen, dipping it cautiously into the inkwell. The dark liquid clung to the tip, ready to inscribe the fragile truths onto the blank canvas. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then began to write, her hand unsteady but determined. I watched as the first letters appeared, imperfect yet imbued with a quiet reverence. Occasionally, she paused, glancing up at me with a question in her eyes. I offered gentle corrections, guiding her hand when the ink smudged or the stroke faltered. It was a delicate dance, the passing of knowledge from one soul to another, fragile as the parchment yet potent as flame. Outside, the city stirred with restless energy. The distant clang of metal raised voices, and the low murmur of crowds seeped through the thick walls, reminders of the turmoil that crept ever closer. Yet within these stone confines, time seemed to fold, holding itself still for the sacred act of preservation. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden beams upon the dust motes that danced like tiny specters in the air, Nerissa's confidence grew. Her strokes became bolder, the words flowing with increasing grace. Occasionally, she smiled, a rare, fleeting thing that spoke of hope amidst despair. When the final verse was transcribed, she leaned back, exhaustion mingling with pride. Her voice was soft but clear as she read aloud what she had written, the words carrying the weight of centuries, the hopes of scholars long gone, and the defiance of those who refused to let memory die. "These words," she whispered, "will live beyond the fire." I nodded, feeling a swell of emotion tightening my throat. In that moment, I saw not just a student, but a guardian, a flicker of the eternal flame that no conflagration could extinguish. Throughout the days that followed, Nerissa became a constant presence by my side. Together, we labored in the shadow of the gathering storm, copying verse after verse, weaving a tapestry of remembrance that might outlast the inevitable. Her youthful hands grew steadier, her understanding deeper, and her resolve firmer. Yet, with every scroll completed, the weight of what we faced pressed heavier upon us. The library's corridors, once alive with the hum of inquiry, now echoed with silence broken only by the distant murmur of unrest. The threat of fire loomed like a specter, its heat already felt in the tightening of the city's nerves. One afternoon, as evening light spilled amber through the high windows, Nerissa and I sat by the open doorway, sharing a moment of quiet respite. The sky above Alexandria blazed with hues of pink and gold, a stark contrast to the darkening shadows that crept across the city. "Do you think the words will truly survive?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I smiled wanly, feeling the ache of uncertainty but also the stubborn flame of belief. "Words are more than marks on parchment," I replied. "They are the breath of thought, the pulse of memory. As long as there is one voice to speak them, they live." Her eyes shone with newfound resolve, and I knew that in her, the library's spirit endured a fragile but unyielding ember against the encroaching night. But even as hope blossomed in the quiet corners of our sanctuary, the world outside grew darker. Rumors of political strife and impending violence reached us through hurried whispers and furtive glances. The city's heart beat faster, its pulse erratic and fraught. One evening, as shadows lengthened and the scent of smoke wafted faintly on the breeze, Nerissa accidentally smudged a particularly delicate line in one of the scrolls. Her face paled, eyes wide with fear and self-reproach. "It is ruined," she murmured, voice trembling. I placed a steady hand over hers, my gaze soft but resolute. "Mistakes are part of the journey. We learn, we endure. The truth is in the striving, not in perfection." Her shoulders relaxed, and a small, grateful smile curled her lips. It was a moment of grace, amid the encroaching chaos, a reminder that the preservation of knowledge was as much an act of spirit as of ink and parchment. As night deepened, Nerissa read aloud the verses we had copied that day. Her voice wavered at first, uncertain and fragile, but gradually it grew stronger, resonating with the weight of our shared purpose. Each word was a testament, a beacon against the gathering darkness. From her lips, the poet's ink took flight, carrying the hopes, sorrows, and defiance of a civilization teetering on the brink. And in that fragile sound, I heard the promise of dawn, a fragile flame that no fire could consume. The days ahead would test us as never before. But for now, in the quiet glow of candlelight and shared resolve, the apprentice's ink spoke louder than the roar of distant flames. Together, we forged a fragile link between past and future, a fragile promise that the essence of human thought might endure even when all else was lost. And so, the scrolls multiplied, silent witnesses to a world in flames, carried forward by trembling hands and steadfast hearts. The ink blurred the story of our times, of loss and hope entwined, a testament to the enduring power of words. As I watched Nerissa grow into her role, I understood at last that the library's legacy was not confined to stone and scroll, but lived on in those who dared to remember, to write, and to believe. In her, the eternal flame flickered, still fragile, yes, but unyielding. And with that thought, I returned to my verses, the poet's task renewed and unbroken, even as the shadow of the coming fire stretched ever nearer. The corridors of the great library, once vibrant with the footsteps of scholars and the whispered debates of minds aflame with inquiry, now lay hushed beneath an oppressive stillness. I moved among the towering shelves, those ancient sentinels of humanity's collective wisdom, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the fading light. The air was thick with dust, disturbed only by the faintest stirrings of forgotten scrolls, their fragile edges curled and brittle. The silence was not a comfort. It pressed upon me like a shroud, heavy with the weight of absence. I paused beneath an archway where, only days before, learned voices had intertwined in passionate discourse. Now, only echoes answered. The murmurs of thought, the rustling of parchment, the scratch of reed pens, all had fled, leaving behind a hollow shell. I traced my fingers lightly along the spines of scroll cases, feeling the uneven texture of vellum and papyrus, sensing the stories and knowledge enshrined within. Each scroll was a fragment of human endeavor, a testament to our ceaseless quest to understand the world and ourselves. Yet even as I revered these relics, a shadow crept upon my heart. What was the worth of such labor when the flames of human folly threatened to consume it all? The city beyond these walls churned with unrest. Political factions quarreled and plotted, indifferent to the treasures amassed here. The library had always been a beacon, a sanctuary where diverse beliefs could meet and collide peacefully in pursuit of truth. Now, that sanctuary lay vulnerable, its silence foretelling a calamity I dared not fully name. In a quiet alcove, I found the shattered remains of a scroll case. The once proud container lay broken, its precious contents strewn carelessly across the stone floor. Burnt edges curled like blackened leaves, the faint scent of smoke still lingering, a ghost of destruction already begun. I knelt among the fragments, heart tightening with each broken piece. These remnants whispered of knowledge lost, voices silenced forever. How many secrets, how many insights would vanish into oblivion? I rose and wandered further, drawn by a shaft of light that pierced the gloom through a high window. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunbeam, their slow dance a fragile ballet of light and shadow. For a moment, they seemed like tiny sparks, embers of the intellect, flickering defiantly in the encroaching darkness. It was a fragile hope, a reminder that even in silence, something endured. My thoughts were interrupted by the distant murmur of raised voices, the clamorous discord of the city leaking through the thick stone walls. The sounds were harsh, alien to the quiet dignity of these halls. Fear and anger clashed beyond, echoing the turmoil within my own soul. The political machinations that threatened the library's fate were relentless, indifferent to the sanctity of knowledge or the value of memory. I found myself longing for Callimachus, the ever-calm presence among the storm. His wisdom had often steadied me, his measured words a balm for rising despair. Though the halls were empty, I imagined his eyes behind those round spectacles, sharp and unyielding, probing the future as he had so many times before. I resolved to seek him out, to share the burden of this silent vigil, and to prepare for what was to come. Each step I took through the empty corridors deepened the ache within me, a mournful awareness of all that was at risk. Yet with that ache came a growing flame of resolve. The physical library might grow silent, its scrolls threatened by ruin, but the essence of its knowledge, the spirit captured in words and memory, could yet survive. It was this belief that compelled me to clutch my worn robes tightly and press onward, to commit verses in secret, to weave a tapestry of remembrance that no fire could wholly consume. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped low, the silent corridors whispered their fragile truths. They spoke of impermanence, of loss, but also of endurance. In the quiet, I heard the pulse of a promise that though the voices might fall silent, the power of words would persist, luminous and unyielding, like faint stars against the gathering night. And so I walked on, a solitary witness to the fading grandeur, a poet bound to memory and hope, determined to give voice to what must not be forgotten. The city outside might tremble, divided and uncertain, but here in the stillness I found a solemn purpose. The library's silence was not surrender. It was a prelude, an aching breath held before the storm, a moment for the intellect to rally and resist. Tomorrow, perhaps, the flames would come. But tonight, in these silent corridors, the poet's heart beat steady, and the words, fragile yet fierce, waited to be born. The silence would not last forever. Neither would the story, and I would be its keeper. The acrid scent of smoke crept insidiously through the labyrinthine corridors of the great library, first a whisper, then a roar. I was seated near the eastern wing, where the scrolls on astronomy and philosophy were kept, when the faint flicker of orange light caught my eye. At first, I thought it a trick of my wary mind, but as the shadows writhed and the smell of burning parchment grew stronger, the truth struck me with the force of a gale. The library was aflame. Chaos erupted like the thunderous cracking of a great tree splitting. Voices shouted, some in alarm, others in frantic confusion, echoing off the stone walls that had stood witness to centuries of human thought. The air grew thick with smoke, a choking haze that blurred the outlines of the grand columns and the endless rows of shelves. I coughed, my throat burning, but my mind rallied with an urgency unlike any I had known. From the depths of the turmoil, a steady hand grasped my arm. It was Celine, her eyes fierce with determination, her grip firm as iron. We must move, she urged, her voice cutting through the din. There is no time to lose. Together, we navigated the labyrinth, the heat pressing in like a living thing. The roar of the fire was a monstrous chorus, punctuated by the crashing of timber and the desperate cries of those caught unawares. Celine's steady presence was a beacon amid the madness, guiding me past fallen debris and smoke-choked passages towards safer ground. Yet even as danger encroached, my hands trembled not with fear but with the compulsion to write. I found a small alcove, shielded somewhat from the worst of the inferno. Kneeling, I unrolled a fragile scroll, its surface already smudged with ash. The candle I carried flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters on the walls. With calloused fingers, I dipped the quill into ink and began to etch my verses, each word a defiant flame against the consuming darkness. Around me, the library groaned and cracked, the sound of splintering wood, and collapsing stone a grim symphony. Sparks drifted down like malevolent snowflakes, settling on parchment and stone alike. My heart pounded in rhythm with the destruction, each line I wrote a desperate plea to eternity. Suddenly, a violent crash shattered the fragile quiet. The ceiling above us buckled, sending a shower of embers and dust. Celine sprang forward, positioning herself between me and the falling debris. "Stay behind me," she commanded, her voice low but resolute. Together, we dodged the blaze's hungry grasp, the heat searing our skin through thin robes. In moments like these, I understood the cruel paradox of fire. It was both destroyer and purifier, consuming all in its path yet leaving behind only the essence of what had been. The scrolls, the tomes, the endless knowledge, they might perish in flame. But the words I wrote could live on, carried in memory and verse. The fire pressed onward, relentless and unyielding, but with Celine's aid, and my verses as my shield, I pressed deeper into the heart of the library's blaze. Each step was a battle, each breath a victory over despair. The flames might devour the scrolls, but they could not silence the poet's voice. As the blaze illuminated the ancient walls in grotesque hues of red and gold, I vowed silently that no matter the cost, the wisdom of Alexandria would not perish without a fight. The fire might rage, the smoke might choke, and the walls might crumble, but the words would endure, whispered on the wind, carried in hearts, eternal as the stars. And so, beneath the burning heavens of our fallen city, I wrote, with smoke in my lungs and fire in my soul. I began the verses that would outlast the flames. The great library might be dying, but the poet's song had just begun. Beyond the immediate horror, the fire's first crackling moments were a crucible for resolve. The poet's hand, though trembling, was steadied by the fierce determination that knowledge must not be lost to the merciless blaze. Celine's presence was not merely protective, but emblematic of the alliance between thought and action, intellect and courage. Together, they embodied a fragile hope amid devastation. The air was thick with smoke, a choking haze that clawed at my throat and blurred the edges of the world I had known all my life. Flames licked hungrily at the ancient stones, their orange tongues casting turbulent shadows that danced wildly against the once pristine walls of the great library. Amidst this inferno, I sat cross-legged on the cold marble floor, a solitary figure against the encroaching devastation, my quill scratching tirelessly upon fragile parchment. Each stroke was a defiant whisper against the roaring chaos, a desperate attempt to wrest meaning from the madness that consumed us. The heat pressed heavy against my skin, a suffocating weight that threatened to overwhelm my senses. Yet my hands moved with a fevered urgency, guided by a resolve that refused to yield. The words poured forth, verses born from the marrow of sorrow and hope that sought to capture not just the knowledge that surrounded us, but the very essence of human endurance. The library, with its labyrinthine corridors and towering shelves, was a vessel of collective memory, a testament to centuries of human inquiry and imagination. Now it was a crucible, testing the mettle of those who dared to preserve its soul. Outside the chamber, the cacophony of destruction was relentless. The crackle of burning scrolls, the crash of collapsing beams, and the anguished cries of those caught in the turmoil formed a dreadful symphony. But within this sanctuary of crumbling stone, my world narrowed to the parchment before me, the ink dark and fluid beneath my trembling fingers. Suddenly, the heavy door burst open, and Celine entered with the force of a tempest. Her eyes, sharp and blazing with determination, scanned the room before settling on me. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her face flushed with exertion and fear. "We have no time," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Others seek to seize what remains, some driven by desperation, others by greed. They care little for knowledge. They want power." I looked up, the weight of her words settling over me. The fire outside was not the only threat. Human folly fanned the flames of destruction just as fiercely. "Then we must be faster," I whispered, returning my gaze to the parchment. "Words can outlast these flames, if only we can write them down in time." Celine nodded, moving to stand guard by the door, her presence a shield against the encroaching chaos. The alliance between her fierce strength and my fragile verses was an unlikely one, yet it was born of necessity and shared purpose. As I wrote, Callimachus appeared, leaning heavily on his staff, his white beard streaked with ash. His eyes, though tired, held a steady light. He gestured toward a concealed alcove, a hidden repository known only to a few. "There is still hope," he murmured. Beneath the rubble lie texts untouched by flame. We must save them. Together, we moved through the dim corridors, the flickering firelight casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us like specters. The air was thick with dust and despair, but also an unspoken promise, a vow to salvage what we could, no matter the cost. In the alcove, ancient scrolls lay buried beneath layers of dust and broken stone. Each was a fragile fragment of human thought, a whisper from the past resisting oblivion. I gathered what I could, pressing them close as if their very touch could stave off the fire's hunger. Back in the chamber, the smoke grew thicker, curling around me like a dark shroud. Yet my voice rose in whispered verses, a litany against despair. Each word was a spark, a flicker of light in the gathering darkness, a fragile shield woven from ink and breath. The fire's roar was deafening now, and the walls trembled with the library's final agony. But I wrote on, driven by a conviction that words could transcend the physical, that the flame of intellect could not be extinguished by mere destruction. Celine's sharp commands kept the chaos at bay, her presence a bulwark of safety amid the storm. Callimachus' wisdom guided us to hidden caches, each discovery a small victory against the inevitable. Hours passed, or perhaps it was moments. Time had lost meaning in the inferno. My body ached, my lungs burned, but within me burned a fiercer flame, the unyielding belief that knowledge, though battered and scarred, would endure. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, the fire's fury began to wane, leaving behind a smoldering ruin. The library's grand halls were no more, but in my hands lay verses that bore the promise of remembrance and resistance. I looked up, eyes meeting Celine's and Callimachus, and saw reflected the same wary hope that had carried us through the night. The library was gone, but its spirit lived on, not in stone or scroll, but in the words we forged amidst the blaze. And so, amidst ashes and ruin, I vowed to carry this fragile flame forward, a beacon for those who would come after. For though fire may consume, it cannot claim the immortal fire of human thought. The battle was far from over, but in the quiet moments between destruction and dawn, I found a truth that no flame could ever burn away, that words, once spoken or written, possess a power beyond the reach of any blaze. The crackling roar of the fire was no longer distant, it had become a living beast, devouring the grand edifice that had stood as a sanctuary for centuries. Smoke curled through the air, thick and acrid, stinging my eyes as I followed Callimachus through the twisting labyrinth beneath the great library. His aged frame moved with surprising agility, guided by decades of intimate knowledge of these hidden corridors. "This way," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos above. "There are storerooms few know of, vaults, where the rarest manuscripts, those too precious or fragile for the open halls, have been concealed." I clutched my scrolls tighter, the parchment crinkling beneath my trembling fingers. Each word I had penned was a fragile ember against the encroaching blaze, a testament to what I refused to let die. Yet, even as I clung to my verses, I knew that the physical scrolls, the tangible vessels of knowledge, were equally vital. The narrow passageways smelled of damp stone and ancient dust. Above us, the library's grand chambers echoed with distant crashes and the intermittent roar of flames claiming their prey. The flickering light from Callimachus's oil lamp cast tall, trembling shadows that danced on the walls, and every step felt weighted with the gravity of our task. "The politicians care little for what is lost," Callimachus murmured as we paused before a heavy oaken door concealed behind a tapestry. His eyes, sharp even beneath bushy white brows, met mine. "But we, those who understand the value of these words, must bear the burden of their preservation. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The library was more than stone and scrolls, it was the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, the fragile thread linking past to future. If that thread snapped, all would be lost. With a creak, Callimachus pushed open the door, revealing a dim chamber lined with shelves, crammed with scrolls and codices wrapped carefully in cloth. Some bore the marks of age and neglect, while others gleamed as if freshly inscribed. "Here lies the essence of Alexandria's soul," he said softly. "Philosophy, medicine, astronomy, knowledge that no flame should claim." I stepped inside reverently, my eyes scanning the treasures as I carefully selected scrolls, feeling the fragile weight of each. The edges of some were singed, a cruel reminder of the fire's reach, yet their contents remained intact. Suddenly, a distant crash made us both freeze. Dust and small debris rained from the ceiling as the building trembled. "We must be swift," Callimachus urged. "The structure weakens." Outside, the muffled shouts of Selene reached us, her protective presence a steady reassurance amid the chaos. Through a narrow window, I glimpsed her silhouette, vigilant and poised, a guardian of both people and knowledge. With trembling hands, I unfurled one scroll, its delicate script etched by a hand long gone. Words flowed like a river of light against the darkness threatening to consume us. I began to write, feverish and desperate, capturing the essence of what we could not carry with us, the spirit of a library ablaze yet unbroken in memory. The hours slipped by in a blur of urgency and aching reverence. Each moment was a dance on the edge of oblivion, a test of resolve and faith. Callimachus's wisdom guided me, Selene's strength shielded me, and my verses became a fragile bulwark against despair. As the fire's fury grew, so too did my conviction. Though the walls around us crumbled and the smoke thickened, the words I committed to parchment promised a defiance that even the fiercest blaze could not extinguish. At last, with a final glance at the hidden trove, I understood that our mission was only beginning. The knowledge we saved was a seed, fragile yet potent, destined to be carried forward by those willing to remember and to resist the erasure of time. "Come," Callimachus said, urgency sharpening his voice. "There is no time to linger. The flames hunger for all, but we shall be their greatest adversaries." With the precious scrolls secured, and the poet's verses burning bright within my heart, we prepared to face the inferno once more, undaunted, unbroken, and resolute. The night was far from over, and the story of Alexandria's great library was still being written, not in stone or scroll, but in the enduring light of human spirit and memory.